Alright, so we've gotten our transmission up onto the bench now, and we are going to begin the process of disassembling it. One of the first things I'm going to do is to remove the speed sensor just to make sure it doesn't get damaged in the process. Here we are on the tailpiece of the Overdrive unit, and you can see this is the vehicle speed sensor right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this back bolt right here. It's a 13 millimeter. And this small yoke that holds it into place is going to come with it. And then the entire speed sensor, if you just wiggle it, should come out. If you can't get it to come out, you may need to take it apart some more. Let's see. It has an O-ring on it that holds it in place. There we go. Okay, and you should get the gear out with it. If for some reason you have different size tires than the ones that were sold with your vehicle, this gear is the one you need to change out to get your speedometer to work correctly. So we just want to set these aside where they're safe so they won't get damaged in the rest of the process. So for the next part of things, I have flipped the transmission up onto the bell housing. Be careful when you do this, because it is going to make a big mess. Every time you switch the angle of this thing, there's going to be more fluid that wants to come out. It's going to stay that way pretty much until you get it disassembled. So as long as you're ready for that, should be fine. There are some places on the case where it comes originally that it is very sharp. Along this mold line on the bottom of the bell housing, and along the same line along the top. And just to keep myself from cutting my hands, I like to take a file and work on filing those flat. Don't go crazy, just get them to not be sharp. There are some other mold marks on the transmission in general that can also be pretty sharp. You can do the same thing to clean them off. So first thing we're going to have to do is remove the set of bolts that attach the overdrive housing to the rest of the transmission. And usually I like to lift it straight up. I've actually got a come along here today I'm going to use to lift it off of the transmission main shaft, because we don't want to move the parts inside the overdrive without an alignment tool. If they get out of alignment, we're going to have to do a disassembly on this to realign it. I'm actually going to rebuild the overdrive this time, so I'll be disassembling it anyway. But it's still a good idea to lift it straight off. If you don't have something like a come-along, it could be a two-person job. You want to put the bell housing maybe on the floor, and after you remove the bolts, just lift it straight off. There is a small bearing in the very back of this. The main thing is that we don't want to pull that bearing out. We want it to stay in its position, especially if you're planning on reinstalling the overdrive without disassembling. Okay, so you do want to get the case as clean as you possibly can before you begin to crack this open. It's an 11 millimeter. And I'm using an extension to give myself a little bit of clearance so I can get in there. You may even want to use a wobbly extension on some of them. Yeah, for this one in particular, I need a wobbly extension. And these two bolts here on the top have little wire clips that go with them. Just make sure you keep track of these wire clips. You need them to attach the wiring harness and the linkage to the transmission. And as I said earlier, it can be a good idea to take a file to some of the sharper parts of the outside of the case, because when you're working on the case like I have been just now, when it's really sharp you can cut your hands. You can also just wear some thick gloves. Okay, so reading the section in Transmission Overhaul, which is section 21-208 in the Dealer Service Manual, it says to remove attaching overdrive unit to transmission case, bolts. Loosen overdrive unit. Use pry tool to start overdrive unit off intermediate shaft and transmission case. Position pry tool between flange and overdrive case and transmission rear servo boss. So this is the flange right here they're talking about, and this is the rear servo boss, this back part of the transmission. Work overdrive unit rearward and off transmission intermediate shaft. Okay, so in our case, rearward is up. I'm going to go grab a small pry tool. Okay, and I didn't need to do much prying in this instance. I come along and the way I've rigged it, have it coming off fairly straight. I'm just going to keep a hand on it because I don't want it getting knocked around in there. Alright, and I can just show you guys that it's all the way off. So now I'm going to take that down and we can begin working on the transmission. Alright, now that we have the overdrive unit removed, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the thrust plate out of the overdrive piston. So the thrust plate is this small circular piece of metal here. We want to be sure to put this down in the same orientation that it was up right now. So that's going to be flat on the table. You can't see where I put it, but it doesn't really matter. And our next move is going to be to pull the overdrive piston up. We want to grab it on either side with our fingertips and move it up and off. And in the same way, keep track of which way is up. Okay, so we've removed this from the retainer. There's a seal on the outer edge of this which has a lip that points a certain direction. We're going to take a pick and pull this seal off entirely and replace it before we reinstall it. And then there's a second seal on the inside of it that works in the same way. You want to take careful notice of how the lips are oriented right now before you remove it, and be sure to install the next seal in exactly the same way. Okay, there's also an overdrive piston thrust bearing. This bearing sits inside the overdrive right here. We want to be really careful to remember which side goes where. So there's a lip on it on the inside, and that lip on the inside is pointing down toward the transmission when the overdrive is installed, or it's pointing up towards the sky when being put into the overdrive unit. So we definitely want to make sure that The thrust plate and the thrust bearing, some rollers in there, are oriented exactly the same way when we go to reinstall it. So I'm going to put it face down, matching that bearing right there. Again, everything needs to come out as clean as possible. Every time you touch a part is an opportunity to clean it. Alright, so until we take apart the overdrive unit, that's all we're going to do with it for now. Alright, so since we're here, I'm just going to go ahead and open up my kit with all my new parts in it. Alright, so back to the overdrive piston. We're going to take off the outer seal, and we notice that the lip is facing down. So I'm just going to pull the entire seal off. I'm going to come over to my rebuild kit and find the same size seal. Should match almost exactly. We have a few of them in here, at least 3, and then a small one. The small one is going to go in the center there. So make sure you find the one that matches it the most closely. It's actually a 4th one too. Alright, those are all a different size though. So now that I've located the same one, and I look at which side the groove is on, I'm going to put the groove back in the same orientation, and we're just going to fit it into this metal groove on the overdrive piston and slowly work it around the entire thing. When we go to reinstall this, we need to be careful not to flip the edge of this seal up. It goes one direction, and usually when we push it back down into the piston retainer, we need to take a feeler gauge or something of a similar nature and go around the edge of it to make sure that it's seated and flat. So then here's the inner one, and I'm going to double check that I have the correct inner one here. But keep looking around. Like I had this one that looked kind of close and it wasn't it. This is the correct one. It has exactly the same shape. Alright, just be sure that you put it back in, oriented the same way that you took it out. In this case, the edge of the skirt pushes down and they match. They both go the same direction. So when the piston is pressurized, the lip is catching in the same way. Alright, now take the 2 that you took out, set them aside, have a container for them. What did I do with my container? Have some place to put your used parts. They're going to be very easy to confuse with the new parts coming out of your rebuild kit. We definitely don't want to confuse them. We want to be able to keep them apart from one another. Sometimes you can just have a location. Oh, here it is. I have a little place to put them. Alright, so that's been updated with the new seals. And we can move on to the next step. The next move is to remove the front oil pump seal. It's on the oil pump that's facing down right now. You may or may not need to actually remove it if you're going to end up removing the whole oil pump anyway. But we do want to take the transmission and reorient it so that we can access both the oil pump and the pan itself. So I'm going to tilt it down and face it towards you. So you can see what I'm talking about. This is the seal in here they're talking about removing. The oil pump will come off with this seal. It's still installed, so it's up to you whether you want to remove that oil pump first or not. Our next move is going to be to take the oil pan bolts off. In this case, the 1/2 looks like it fits a little tighter, so I'm going to use the 1/2 inch. And we just want to go around and take them all off. If they were tightened correctly, it shouldn't be too much effort. Now, depending on which gasket you used, whether it's a reusable gasket or whether you RTV'd it in place last time you had the transmission apart or when it was initially built, you may need to use some force to get the oil pan off. Sometimes I need to take a scraper and find a good corner to pound it into without hopefully damaging the pan or the case. It's a reusable gasket without RTV, which appears this one is. You may not need to do anything like that. So this gasket is actually quite stuck in place. I'm going to get a scraper, so hopefully I can move it away from the pan without too much effort. Like I said, if it's a reusable one, you want to just be careful not to damage it. You'd really like to be able to use it again a second time, or third time, or fourth time. And we just are going to clean that off eventually. We can set it aside for now. You can see that some of the paint is peeling off the inside of this transmission pan. So we're going to need to clear all that as much as possible. You can also take the magnet out. So to get the metal shavings off, you just want to use a rag or a paper towel. Technically, for everything inside a transmission, we do not want to use paper towels once we're actually cleaning it. We want to use something like a microfiber cloth, some kind of lint-free cloth, because all these little bits of lint and cellulose that come off of a paper towel can clog up a transmission. It may not appear to matter, but over the entire surface area of the interior, it can start to matter quite a bit. I'm going to keep the magnet in the pan so I don't lose it. Alright, so here is the transmission filter. These 3 screws need to be removed with a Torx T25 bit. It looks kind of like a star. It's almost like an Allen wrench, but more like a star. You can see that because of the shape of the filter, there's only one way it can be oriented. Just going to take off all 3 of these screws and remove the transmission filter. Depending on how it's oriented, sometimes you might get a lot of fluid out of somewhere when you remove this. Right now it's mostly drained. And you can see where suction had caused it to get sucked flat. This transmission filter actually isn't that old. Looks a lot older than it is. Definitely ready to be changed though. Alright, so our next step is going to be to remove the valve body. This whole unit right here is the valve body. And in most instances, even in a full rebuild, we are going to leave the valve body alone. No reason to take it apart. If you do for some reason have issues with the valve body, it may be much easier to replace the entire thing than to try to open up the sandwich of metal. So leave all these torque screws alone. We're going to focus on these 7/16 screws right here. And we want to remove them and replace them in exactly the same configuration. So you can either get a piece of cardboard to keep track of them, or you can put them in a magnetic pan in such a way that you know exactly how they came out. So I'm going to get a wrench really quick. Okay, so like I said before, these are 7/16. I've got a socket on an extension. When you go to install this, it's very important that you install it gradually and at a diagonal. You go to uninstall it, it's not quite as important. But I do sometimes tend to work that way anyway. There are some springs that the valve body is holding in place, and an accumulator. Like I said, you just want to make sure you keep track of where the bolts are coming from so that you can put them back in the exact same location that you took them out of. Realistically, there's only really two heights of bolts here. If for some reason you got them mixed up, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but they may be slightly warped, or who knows, as a result of their long life holding these things together, and we would just like to put them back in the same spot. And again, as you break the suction between the two halves, there may be some leakage. You may get some fluid out. Just try and be aware. Okay, so I think that's all 10 of the bolts that hold it in place. I'm going to push up a little on the linkage and on the electrical connector. And by pushing up on the two of those, the whole valve body as a unit should come free. And then we're going to need to pull the park purl through with it. Take the whole valve body and set it aside. Okay, next we're going to remove the accumulator piston and the outer and inner springs. This is the outer spring, and this is the inner spring. And we want to look at how this was all put together. We need to put it back exactly the way that it came out. It's not rocket science, but spring goes inside the bottom of the accumulator, and then the outer spring goes on top of it. There are two seals on the outer edges of the accumulator, one right here and one here. We're going to go ahead and take a pick and find the break in the seal. And if you want to make your life easier, you can just put the two springs aside, as long as you remember how to put them back together. And we're going to pull this seal out of the accumulator. I may actually need a smaller pick, we'll see. There's a little slice in it at one point, and that slice is where it comes apart. It's made of semi-hard plastic, so it comes off like so. And the bottom one works the same way. Look for the slice in it. And then it comes off like so. Now we're going to go into our rebuild kit, and we're going to find exactly those same two hard pieces of plastic. So you can see in here there's a couple of these that are covered in blue dots. Those blue dots indicate that they're the ones for the accumulator piston. I'm going to cut this bag of seals open. And I'm going to look through here until I find the ones that match in size. So that blue one right there looks like it matches the top one. And when I set it on top of it, they match perfectly. And then I'm looking for a smaller one. It's almost exactly the same. It's the same material at least. You can see it also has a little blue dot on it. That little blue dot is indicating it's the right one. I'm going to line it up with the original. So here are the new ones on top of the old ones, showing me they're the right ones. There are the old ones. Okay, so I'm going to take the accumulator piston and place the top one on there. Just start it on one end, work it around until the two come back together. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side and make sure I don't have them crossed exactly how I just crossed them. Yeah, can't cross them. It needs to be put together like so. Alright, so there is my accumulator piston with new seals. Just going to go ahead and place it back on the bench along with the springs that go with it. Could still clean it a little bit more to get all the gunk off of it. And I'm going to take my old seals and I'm going to put them in my container right here with my other old seals. Our next move is going to be to remove the front band lever pin access plug. So we need a long extension that is 1/4 drive, or you can use a different extension with an adapter, whatever works. Either way, you're just going to unscrew this plug right here and keep track of it along with everything else. There's probably a big chunk of Loctite that's going to come off with it. Just throw that away. And one of our first moves is that we're going to need to tighten the front band all the way so that we can use the band to hold it in place. Okay, so this right here is the device to tighten the front band. We want to loosen this band. Okay, so here's the lock nut that goes around the adjustment lever, or the adjustment screw. And get on there all the way with 3/4 socket, and then loosen that. The screw itself is a 5/16, but we can also just tighten it all the way by hand. This will have to be tightened again later. Like I said, this will have to be tightened again later and then loosened. We just want to tighten it up until it feels snug. You don't have to go crazy. We're just trying to hold the front clutch pack in place while we pull the oil pump out. So we'll tighten that and then retighten the lock nut. Just make it snug. You don't have to over tighten it. And then we're going to begin our process of removing the oil pump from the transmission. So we're going to need both a wrench this size and a slide hammer. Okay, so these bolts again are 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter. It's going to go through and take out all of the pump bolts. This whole front unit is the transmission oil pump. Each one of these should have a small washer on them. Be careful not to lose them or leave them on the pump. Or we can set these aside where they'll be safe. Alright, and if we look at the inside of the holes that the pump bolts just came out of, this hole right here and this hole right here have threads that come all the way to the front of the pump. So we're going to use those threads along with the slide hammer to remove the pump. In the dealer service manual it says to use slide hammer tools C-3752 into the threaded holes on either side of the pump. And it looks like what fits is a 3/8 at 16 tap per inch. So I made this fit into it. I'm going to look around and see if I have a bolt that's exactly 3/8 by 16 taps per inch. Alright, so I found two different bolts that are both 3/8 bolt with 16 taps per inch. And in this case they are a 9/16 bolt. I'm going to take my 9/16 socket and tighten this bolt into the oil pump. Alright, when it's snug, that's far enough. And then I have the second bolt, 3/8 bolt, 16 taps per inch. And be careful with these. Definitely don't want to cross thread this bolt. Try to be patient getting it in there. If you have any issue, you may need to get a tap and check it with a tap. So I'm going to go grab a tap. So I've got a tap and I'm just going to gently thread it into place. If it takes very much force to move it, you probably shouldn't. If you're not used to using taps, I also recommend you be very careful. The back of this tap is a 5/16 wrench. So ever so gently, just going to move this tap in and out a little bit. Make sure that the beginning of all of this is clear. Then I'm going to take a die and do the opposite to the bolt. Make sure the beginning of it is nice and clean. Okay, so I've got my 3/8 tap or 3/8 die. I'm going to thread my bolt in there. Notice it stops right away. I'm just going to take a wrench. This bolt's had a rough time. Even its head isn't ready for a wrench. Okay, my bolt was a little messed up. I had to take a grinder to it to get it back into shape. So now I can just take the bolt, put it on my wrench, and re-thread it into the die. I'm actually going to just hold the bolt and move the die ever so gently. until I feel like I've gotten it started in there. And I'm going to use the wrench to turn it into place. If it takes too much force, you're doing it wrong. So I can double check this. Double check that it is 16 taps per inch. Yeah, it is. Just want to make sure. Take your time. And even if you get it to move forward, you're still going to want to back it up every once in a while. Okay, so I got it past the end there. It's moving freely now. Alright. So now that I have slightly tapped the opening and put a die down the bolt, two things should come together without any issue. In any situation, if you can't get a bolt to thread, it's a good idea to do what I just did before you mess it up. Alright, so now it's threading quite nicely. See, it went most of the way in without a wrench. And I'm just going to push it in the rest of the way until it stops. I'm going to put my tap and die away really quick. Alright, so before we do this, to remove the pump, we want to just make sure that the reaction shaft on the other end is nice and free. Nothing is sitting on it. It's not being pushed up on. Right now it's over the edge of my table. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our slide hammer and we're going to gradually move the entire pump back. We're going to hit 1 or 2 times on each side, and then we're going to keep moving it out. Alright, so once the pump has broken the seal with the case, it should come out like so. There's a couple of spacers and metal rings on here, and also the pump seal is usually stuck to the pump. So all these things are going to get replaced. We'll need to remove them. But first we just need to remove our 2 bolts that we used to get the pump out. If you wedge the pump on the way out and one edge or one lip gets out a little too far, you may need to just whack it back in. If you move evenly and with the same number of hits, you should be able to get the pump to come out without too much issue. Okay, so that's it for our slide hammer tools. We can set those aside. Alright, so next we're going to loosen the front band adjusting screw until it's all the way loose. So we're going to back the lock nut off again, releasing it, give it a few turns. Then we're just going to take this screw pretty much all the way out. It's going to fall off the band. And we just need it till it's almost flush with the case. We can leave it on the outside there. Alright, next we're going to remove the front band strut. I'm just going to move part of the band that direction and take the strut out. Keep a look at it. We want to just make sure that we orient it the same way when we put it back in. It actually probably doesn't matter, but nevertheless. Then we just want to squeeze the front band together and work it so that it clears the edge of the case right there. And we're going to pull the front band out of the case just by taking it out like so. Set that aside. Okay, so we're going to remove the front and rear clutch assemblies next. So coming around to the other side of the case, got our oil pump out of the way. We want to take both clutch assemblies out as a unit. We're just going to grab them by the shaft and pull forward like so. And you'll notice that there is a thrust washer and a tab washer, and that they came out in a particular orientation. These need to go back in exactly the same orientation. So the tab washer was this side up towards the bottom clutch pack, and then the washer was behind it. I'm going to take all these and leave them face up so I know exactly how they go back in. And in this case I also have this small piece of metal. I am not 100% sure where it came out of, so I'm going to have to look into that. It was in the center here. Doesn't look like where it goes. Sometimes there's a mystery. Okay, so these can be set aside for disassembly. We're going to have to change out all the clutches in these. Okay, next we're going to remove the entire intermediate drive, planetary drive assembly. Push on the back reaction shaft to move it forward. And then take this entire unit out. We're going to inspect this later. Pretty much rule of thumb, as long as this rotates and is solid, this part isn't going to need very much work done on it. There are some pieces, some metal pieces that can be replaced. Our next move is going to be to remove the rear band adjusting screw. So let's see. The lock nut on it is a 14 millimeter. So we're going to go ahead and break that lock nut. I mean, open it. And then we're just going to adjust the screw out until we can get the rear band off. The rear band, or the reverse band, has a very small amount of play in it. You need to squeeze it open to be able to remove it from the reverse drum. Oh, and we're going to need to remove the snap ring. Okay, so if we look down into the reverse drum, there is a snap ring that holds it in place that we're going to need to remove. Just need to get a pair of snap ring pliers on it and open it up until you can pull it off and forward. Depending on the shape of your snap ring pliers, this may be easier or more difficult. If you get one edge up, sometimes you can work around it with a screwdriver. Or if you get lucky, sometimes you can pull it off in one movement. Either way, try to be patient. Try not to damage anything or scratch anything. Just keep putting steady pressure on the ring and attempt to move it out of its groove. This is often something that takes a lot of patience and can also sometimes take working one end up and just working your way around it. Sometimes a little bit of a combination of the two. You have to push the snap ring out of its groove somewhere. Alright. The snap ring should come out. Now, after removing the snap ring, the entire reverse drum, if you wiggle it, should come out of the transmission. Set that aside. You have to clean it. And the reverse band should come out of the transmission. This reverse band actually has a lot of material on it, but we are going to end up removing it or replacing it in this instance because this is our second rebuild on this transmission and we didn't choose to replace it the first time. Alright, so the exception of that race in the back there, which most of the time you will not have to replace. If you do need to replace it, it comes out like so. And it's full of little bearings. One of which I just dropped. As I was saying a second ago, most of the time you will not need to remove this race. Put it back in there. Just how it was. And yeah, if you drop one of those bearings, it pops right back into place. If something's gone wrong with the transmission or it's been damaged, you may need to remove this overrunning clutch cam that's here at the back of the transmission case. In most instances, as long as these little overrunning clutch bearings are good and the cam itself has not been scored or damaged in any way, you're not going to need to replace it. But it does come out of the case if you need to replace it. It may need to be rotated until you find a small hole on it. You might not even be able to see it right now. But if for some reason there's damage to this part or damage to this race, you're going to have to pull it out at this stage. Alright, next we're going to remove the rear band reaction pin. So we need a magnetic tool of some kind that we can get in there with. And we're going to put the magnet on the reaction pin. You might also be able to put some force on it using some snap ring pliers. Either way, you want to rotate it and get it to come out. Go ahead and keep a hand on the other parts. Alright, so just take the reaction lever and put it aside. Take the pin and put it aside. There are a couple of small O-rings on this pin. You may end up replacing them. We'll see about that. Okay, so here I'm just draining the remaining oil out of the case. Still some down in there. Just went ahead and tipped it over the side. Just make sure not to drop it. It is aluminum and it will crack. But yeah, it's given it a while to drain. Now we're ready to begin the rebuild process. Okay, so our next move is to compress the front servo rod guide. And I've got a little bit of a socket here that fits into the rod guide. And then I've got a large C-clamp. I'm going to place a piece of wood underneath the C-clamp on the outside where it meets the case, because I don't want to mar the case. And then I've also got a small rubber washer that I'm going to put in between these two. So this should allow me to compress the rod guide without pushing on the rod. There is a specific tool designed to do this. If you have that, go for it. I'm only going to compress the rod guide about 1/8 of an inch, so it's spring loaded. And we're just going to put a little bit of a pressure on it until we see it move down. Let me show you guys what I'm talking about. So the rod guide for the front servo, it's this flat piece of metal, and when the spring is all the way expanded, it goes up against this snap ring. Go around to the other side just in case. See, I moved the band lever out of the way. So now that I've compressed it a little bit and the pressure's off the snap ring, I'm just going to take some snap ring pliers and remove the snap ring. So I'll get my snap ring pliers in there, and there's a groove on either side of it. Or sometimes you can take a small screwdriver and there is a dent on either side of the snap ring. You can just pop it out and up. Just try to be patient and not to mar the case. There we go. Then you just want to work yourself around the snap ring little by little until you pop it out of location. And it might whack you if you're not careful. Okay, so take the snap ring out of the rod guide and set it aside, face up so you remember where it goes, and then gently release the pressure on the rod guide until it pops up. And all this stuff is good to keep nearby because we're going to need to recompress it. And be careful because it can pop up and injure you. Okay, if it doesn't pop open, you may need to recompress it a little bit and just wiggle it around until it does. It can sometimes catch on the groove that the snap ring lives on. Just push it down. Until it's straight. And then let it back up again. If it still won't come out, you may need to tap on it with the rubber end of something, the plastic end of something. Or you can possibly see which way it needs to move. Anyway, it should eventually pop up like that. And then you can get underneath it and take it out. There's probably quite a bit of fluid in there still, so be careful. Alright, so remembering which side is up, take the rod guide out, and then take the spring out. We want to reach down inside the servo and grab it from the center and pull this plunger out. Alright, and there's the front servo opened. You want to mentally remind yourself how everything goes together when you go to put it back. Then inside of the piston for the front servo is another small snap ring. So get some snap ring pliers that fit in there and go ahead and get them on the two circles. Then you're going to squeeze that snap ring closed and pull it out. Cool. Again, you don't want to turn that thing upside down. You want to leave it oriented the way that it was installed. And then we'll pull this out. Some fluid in there. Just go ahead and add it to the rest of your fluid in your case. We can drain it off again later. Alright, so there's an O-ring on this part. This orange O-ring. I'm going to get a pick really quick so that I can pull that off. Okay, so getting this O-ring off of here, just get underneath it with the pick. I'll put this piece back down. I'm going to go find this in my rebuild kit. There were two O-rings in my rebuild kit that were almost the same size, but this one is the right one because it is the actual same size as the one I've taken out of the vehicle. So I'm going to put that where I can find it, and I'm going to put the used one in with the rest of things that have already been used. And I'm going to place it right on the edge here, pop it back in, put this back inside the piston, and then gently twist it until I get it seated without rolling the O-ring. Once it's seated again, then I'm going to come back here and recompress this and attempt to get it back in. Being a little bit lazy here, there is a way to set these snap ring pliers up so that they go the other direction more easily, but in this instance that shouldn't be too difficult. Alright, so there's the snap ring back in the plunger. The rod can now move up and down again. That's good. Now I'm going to take my pick and go around the outside of this seal, find the split in it, and open it up. And then do the same thing with the bottom one. You can see these parts are both colored with some orange dots. And I'm going to go over to my kit and find both of these. Okay, so double checking that the new ones are exactly the same size as the old ones. Yeah, they line up just fine. I'll take the old ones and add them to my pile of used parts. Now I'm going to take the front servo and find the break in the seal and reinstall it exactly the way it came out. Then I'm going to take the bottom one and find the break in the seal and reinstall it exactly as it came out. Okay, so the entire plunger assembly can go back in where it was. Be careful to seat it all the way. There's still a little fluid in there, so I'm not too worried about it getting dry. Then my spring was next. Then on this part here, I can see there's another ring. So I'm going to check and see if I have a metal ring like this one to replace it. Alright, this particular kit does not appear to have any metal ring to replace it, but it is a fairly robust part of the transmission, so I'm not necessarily certain that it needs to be replaced. Just going to wipe off this spring with a microfiber towel while I have the opportunity. Put it back into position. And then I'm going to put the rod guide back into position over it. Getting the rod guide back down in may take a little bit of force, and going around it with something like a screwdriver, it squishes into place a lot like a piston ring does. So once you get it all the way into its groove while you're putting pressure on it, it should be able to make it past the grooves and into position. Once you have it most of the way in, you go ahead and stop. And we're going to put our setup to squish the rod guide back down into position. I got a wood block on the outside so I won't mar up the case. And then I've got a socket. This one's a 14mm that fits into the dent in the rod guide, but allows the rod to pass through it. And I'm just going to tighten that down, hopefully without messing up the case. And I've just got to go about 1/8 of an inch just until I can see the groove all the way around it for the snap ring. Then I take my snap ring and make sure it's oriented the same way. Just fit it around the rod guide. And it's going to get snapped back into the same place it started. Sometimes it might be easiest to just move one end first. And depending on how much force it takes, I might have to shove on it. I might have to bend on it. We'll see. So with one hand I'm going to take a screwdriver and put it on the end. I've got the other end of the snap ring in place. I'm going to start pushing down on it until I can get it closer. Then I'm going to put the screwdriver back in there again. We're basically bending this into a C shape and then putting some pressure on it every once in a while. You'll notice there's a place that's making contact with the case. You might want to bend against it right there. And gradually work it down into the servo. Sometimes I find if I just keep pushing down gradually where it's already past the edge, it'll eventually work its way back in. Alright, once the snap ring's in place, we can take the pressure off of the rod guide, and that's our front servo rebuilt. Okay, to do our rear servo, it's fairly similar. I actually have a big ash washer that I'm going to use to push down on the rear spring retainer. Again, I'm using a small block of wood on the outside of the case, trying not to mar up the case at all. We're just going to try and get it centered on the spring retainer. You may have to wiggle it around a little in the process. Alright, and then we tightened this again just like 1/8 of an inch or so. And we can see a little gap on all sides. If you're not happy with the way it's compressing the first time, go ahead and recenter it and do it again. In any case, you should see a gap all the way around it. If you don't see a gap, you might want to push it a little bit farther. Okay, once there's a gap, get in there with the screwdriver. Start at one end, the end that has the notch cut out of it. and start the snap ring out. And just keep gently going around it, moving it up little by little until it pops out. Take the snap ring out and lay it down flat and remove your C-clamp. I'm working with a 6-inch C-clamp. And let's take our washer out of the way. Okay, so now we are looking at the spring retainer. It actually looks a little warped. Maybe I didn't do it quite straight enough. If it is a little warped, you might have to give it a slight whack to get it to come out. Just try not to damage it. If it still doesn't come out, you may need to recompress it a second time. Just mind, it is spring loaded. So my spring retainer got slightly bent in the process. I'm going to have to take it over to the bench and pound it flat again. Try to be careful with it. It can get a little warped coming out of there, but it won't be the end of the world. Okay, so after bending it just slightly on the way out, I ended up pounding it flat using a 2-inch socket. 2-inch socket was a perfect size to get it up against the workbench and pound it down flat again. So just a little trick in case you do bend it. Also be sure to clean the interior edge here. If it gets marred in any way, it just needs to be sanded slightly. Alright, so as to rebuilding the rear servo, and pull it out, we're going to get some fluid along with it. You'll see there's a very small snap ring on the bottom there. And then there's a seal, a rubberized seal that goes around the outer edge. The rear plunger has this seal on it. You can see that the lip is facing down. So we're just going to pull this seal out. Start it in one spot and work it all the way around. We're going to go find that same seal in our kit. Here's our new one. Should be the same exact shape, size, and color. And we're just going to fit one edge of it in there. And reinstall the seal by gently working it around the edge. Stretching it but not catching it until it goes into place. Alright, so there's our plunger with its new seal. Take our old seal and put it with our spare parts, our used parts. Alright, and there is our new seal and our plunger. And we're going to fit this back into the spot it was in. In this case, you may need to rotate this to get the seal to sit flat. It needs to end up seated flat. Generally, if a little bit of rotation is applied when it's going in, it will end up all the way down. Next, we put our spring back in, and then our spring retainer on top of it. Mind you, you want to be sure to clean any and all parts while you're reassembling it. If you see any gunk on them, any crud, any kind, you want to clean them off really good. Now's your chance to get the inside of this transmission totally clean. We're going to put the spring guide back on there, and we're going to put our big old washer back on there. And then I'm going to open this back up till it fits the case along with my wooden block. And I'm going to try and get it as centered as I can before I tighten it. I'm compressing the spring, but I'm also pushing the spring retainer down into its space. So I want to be careful, keep an eye on everything, keep it centered, and wiggle it back and forth. Till I'm in there past the snap ring location. If you notice you've got one side a little higher than the other, you might want to push on it. Maybe not quite that hard. In any case, you want it seated very evenly as it goes in. So, seated evenly, not in the groove for the snap ring. Okay, once you see that you have cleared the snap ring groove on all sides, that is far enough. You're going to take your snap ring and remember where you had the gap in it. It's good to put it back in the same spot. You want to push it back in, starting with that side that has the groove on it. And then just gradually work your way around it and pushing it down and into position. I usually use a screwdriver because it helps me get in there. Alright, once you hear it snap, it's seated. You take your clamp back off. And that is the rear servo rebuilt. Might have gotten a little muck on it. In the dealer service manual, we're on page 21-215. Under overhaul service information, it says, inspect all the transmission bushings during overhaul. Bushing condition is important as worn, scored bushings contribute to low pressures, clutch slip, and accelerated wear of other components. However, do not replace bushings as a matter of course. Replace bushings only when worn, scored, or if doubt exists about bushing conditions. So the bushings are the metal parts of the transmission that make contact. Okay, so that's the end of part one. We have gone through removing the pan and removing the filter. We've removed the valve body itself and the oil pump, and we've done the seals in our two sets of servos and our accumulator. Be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel so that we can continue to make more videos like this. I'm just doing this on my own in my spare time. Stay tuned for part two, where we will continue disassembling the transmission, and happy wrenching.